Hi, class. Mr. Watlington, welcome to week two of our CYB 260. This is Legal Human Factors of Cybersecurity. And again, great class. Thank you for the comments and the feedback last week in your discussion post and the assignments you turned in. Now, one thing I will say, I always love just a little bit of controversy. And what do I mean by that? Don't be afraid to disagree. Don't be disagreeable, but you can disagree. Meaning that, and there are times I may throw some things out there in the discussion post just to arouse conversation. And by all means, fire back, Of course, be respectful to each other and myself. But if you have a different opinion, let it be known. I mean, that's where the fun comes in. But just remember, we're all in this thing together so that we can keep our information as safe as possible. This week, we're going to talk about some privacy, personal identifiable information, PII. But really, I'm going to go kind of in a little different direction and talk a little bit more about data rights management, and intellectual property. All right, let's get started with this. So when we think about Module 2, like I say, let's look at overall first learning objectives. Things we're going to tackle this week. We're going to analyze some privacy risk implied by connecting devices in the human environment. Also going to describe approaches that individuals and organizations and even governments have taken to protect our privacy. And then you're going to look at some factors to which will contribute to the changing stance on issues with respect to privacy. So at a glance, what are we doing? We're going to complete, like I said, you're going to complete the knowledge check. Also, you're going to complete your initial discussion post. And this post this week is going to be on the Internet of Things, convenience versus privacy and secrecy. Remember, always respond to at least 2 peers. You will need to have that first one done, your initial post, by Thursday of this week. And I say get out there earlier. That way it makes it easier for everyone to start responding back. And you're going to complete a privacy case study. Okay? This is an activity. There's about 3 different case studies. You pick one, you're going to complete that. And this week we're in Chapter 10, Legal and Privacy Issues in Information Security. Chapter 10 in the textbook. Okay, now, this is something that you won't see in the textbook because I always kind of want to throw this out here. Like I say, I don't really try to cover what's in the textbook. Why? Because you are adults and you can read the textbook. Don't need me doing that. I like to bring up some things to provoke thinking and to look at things maybe from a different angle sometimes. Okay, so when we think about privacy, and I think in one of the posts I did in week 1 talked about trust. And to me, it's more about trust than about privacy. Here's what I mean. We want our information to be private only to people that we don't want to see it, right? Okay, meaning that I need to trust you. So we're really looking for a trust relationship. So when we build a trust relationship with respect to our information, our personal data, trust kind of breaks up into 3 components: ethics, morality, and the law, okay? So, and each of these components have their own place. So when we think about ethics, what is ethics? That's what governs your professional interactions. I know many of you at work, you probably have an ethics department. If you're like me, every 3 or 4 weeks, months, we got to take ethics training and to try to, ramp up, our overall ethics, doing the right thing. That's what we talk about here. And that's a big element in this trust factor associated with privacy. Then morality. When we think about morality, what is moral? Governs private and personal interactions. Okay, and trust me, these there's overlap between these. But really, ethics. That's talking about in your professional life, morality, personal life, and how you associate and how you do things. And then the legal side of that, the law. What does that do? That governs our societies as a whole. So all of these together, the relationships between these 3 things, ethics, morality, and law, bring together really the basis of our privacy issues. Because things that I want to be private is going to be all based on my professional interactions, which is ethically binding. It's going to be based on my personal and private interactions, which is morally binding, and it should be legal based on the governing laws of that land, right? So understanding those relationships to me is fundamental to what we're talking about with respect to privacy and our expectation of privacy. Because if I say I want something to be private and I share it with my cousin, okay, that's one thing. If I want something to be private and I share it with my spouse or my mate, there is a different level of trust between my mate and my cousin, or my mate and my bestie, So it's hard to hold both of those entities to the same level of trust. Why? Because we have different interactions. If it's a workmate, if it's an office mate. So which really comes down to understanding what we talk about with respect to who can I trust my personal information to and with? And what is the bounds of that trust? I don't trust my cousin. No. My wife? Yes, I do. So that's what establishes what's going to be private as opposed to what I'm thinking may be private because my cousin may just let it go out there and then keep it rolling. All right, so when we think about privacy and personally identifiable information, some things we want to look at. How do you balance? This is a big question this week. Huge, huge, huge question. How do you balance privacy, security, and compliance with convenience? Now, I will say there is something fundamentally different with each of those. There and for the guys, I know a lot of you are cybersecurity, right? That's your major, cybersecurity. And I noticed that a lot of you guys this is either your last course or you're getting close to going out and becoming a cybersecurity professional. Well, this is huge. The differences between privacy, security, and compliance. I can have data secure, but it may not be private. I may not be keeping it private. I can keep data private, but I may not be keeping it secure. I can maintain compliance and miss the mark on these other two completely. Let me give you some examples, okay? I have a spreadsheet with a lot of information on individuals in my organization, and I have there some privacy information, their social security number and things of that nature. So how do I handle that? I could secure it. I could encrypt it. I could put it in a safe. Now it's secure. However, is it really private? Because now I have to look at who else has access to that safe. There may be many other people who are authorized in that organization who has access to that safe. And still the information would be secure because everyone who gets into the safe is authorized to go there. However, it's no longer private. Okay? So the secrets that we want to keep secret, that's great from a organizational perspective. But the privacy information is something totally different. So now how I will handle, how I will classify, how I will mark and identify privacy information is going to be in a completely different realm than security. That's why you see now many organizations have a privacy officer who is a completely different individual than your security officer because they're looking at totally different aspects of how to maintain access control of privacy information as opposed to just maintaining access control to keep information secure. Now, we talk about compliance, and trust me, I've lived in this compliance world for quite a while. And unfortunately, cybersecurity has come down to almost too much compliance. You say, what? What do you mean by that? Well, here's what I mean, because, and trust me, inspections and all those things are great. We got to have them, CCRIs and inspection teams coming in. But what happens over time in an inspection-oriented environment, that becomes the measure of success. We passed our last inspection, so we must be good. We passed our last inspection, so our data must be private, and it must be secure. No, may not always be the case. That we can pass an inspection, meaning that we are meeting controls that have been put in place, but our culture of privacy and security can still be lacking in that organization. So understanding first the differences between privacy, security, and compliance. That all three have a role in your organization. All three are completely different, but all three still play together. Now, how do you balance that with convenience? Because at the end of the day, we can make things, yes, we could lock things down to where, they're so secure, so private, and so compliant until that piece of information or data isn't good for anything because no one can use it. At the end of the day, that data, that information has to be used. It has to move. Someone has to use that. Someone has to consume that information so it can become knowledge and so forth. So how do we maintain not just convenience, but maintain mission operations and still balance privacy, security, and convenience? Those are some things you're going to look at this week. And, policy is a big part of that. Privacy policy, having the right policy. But I'll tell you more so than policy is culture. It's a cultural mindset within organizations to where, people understand that the intellectual property of the business is important, but businesses also have to understand that the personal and private information of the individual is important. Second thing on that, it's a dual-edged sword. And it's getting blurrier, by each day because now we have more people bringing personal information into a corporate workspace or into a public workspace. So there's some onus from the individual perspective to ensure that what we bring into the workspace environment, if it's private, if it's personal information, that we maintain some responsibility and ownership of that information ourselves. It's up to is it up to the organization? Yes, of course. To maintain controls, compliance, have the right policies. But really, it's a cultural mindset you have to sometimes take years to grow in an organization where you gain that trust factor, that the information that have been collected, my personal information, whether it's in HR or in personnel, wherever it may be, that information is being kept as private and shared only where it needs to be shared. And like I say, this gets so much more interesting and complex as we move to this thing called the Internet of Things. Well, anytime you go into a connected environment, it is almost an oxymoron to say, I want to be private in a networked environment. That's very, very difficult. I want to be connected to everyone, but I want to be private at the same time. So it's a tall order that we're even asking. I want to have all my stuff out there, but I want to be sure that, it's all kept private, and it's the world's responsibility to keep my stuff private. That's what we're kind of asking, because now we want these things. We want to be able to sit on our cell phone and do banking and shop, and we want to be able to do all these things, right, connected. I don't want to have Roku TV, and I want to have my smart refrigerator, and so while I'm shopping, I can see what, if I need a gallon of milk, all the things we want. And what provides that? The Internet of Things and the network. But at the same time, I want it all to be private. So it's almost oxymoronic, but that's the struggle, that's the challenge, as well as surveillance. I know it's easy to be a purist. It is. It is so easy to be a purist when things are just going our way. Here's what I mean. Yes, I can wave the flag like everyone else. No surveillance. No, I don't want the big brother watching. I don't want all this until something happens to my child. Well, wouldn't there should be some cameras around here somewhere? You mean nobody saw anything? So instantly, my stance changes from, yes, I don't want big brother in my business, to, look, there's got to be cameras. And I'm walking across the street to my neighbor. You got Ring cameras, right? Did you see anything? So the balance and policy of protection between, surveillance, compliance, convenience, it is a very, very murky area, because there's a lot of, we're talking about what? Personally identifiable information. Now it's personal. As long as it's at work, I work at Raytheon. Okay, Raytheon lost their stuff. Well, okay, sorry to hear that, but life moves on. I lose my stuff, now we got an issue. If my stuff gets out there, because it's personal now, and there's emotions, there's feelings, and you go to a company, there's bottom line associated with these things. So when we think about these topics, great topics for discussion to find the balance. How do you find the balance? Rip all the cameras out, because you guys are getting too much information until, a young girl or young boy or person gets, attacked. Something happens. And now we're at the school. I can't believe you guys don't have cameras in here. So very interesting dynamic, very interesting times that we are living in now. So when we think about privacy, personal identifying information, there's something that I always like to discuss. IP, right? Not Internet Protocol, intellectual property, and why the laws on intellectual property is so important. Okay, when we think about intellectual property, it really does come down to who owns your data. This is the question to end all questions. In a connected environment, who really owns your data? It's almost like saying, okay, I got my stuff and I put my stuff in a storage. One of these, monthly storage bins. Who really owns that? Do you think you do, right? I tell you what, go 3 months and don't pay the bill. Then who owns your stuff? You'll see it sitting out at a garage sale. So really, it's the same thing. So yeah, we want to put our information in Google and Amazon and all of these places, and we want to do it for free, right? We love Google. Why? Because it doesn't charge anything. I get Gmail for free. What a deal! Why do you think Google gives you Gmail for free? Do you really think we love you so much and we care about your ability to communicate that we're just going to give you Gmail for free? Yeah. No. Because they're harvesting your data. Yes, it's business. It's not personal. So who really owns your data? Interesting question, right? So when we think about that, also, what is the concept of legal ownership? Yeah, I mean, really, and that's why having service level agreements, SLAs, contracts in place, so that to understand, what is the realm of legal? What does legal ownership really mean? And I struggle with this today, even with our own home. We own a home here in Texas, right? But do we really? Do we really own this house? Again, let me not pay the taxes for a year. And I'll find out really quickly who actually owns that house. The next person who comes up and puts a lien on it and pays the taxes. So legal ownership is a very interesting area. And that leads us into, the basis, and this is more in the business environment, of patent protections. Because if you want to own it, you want to be legal, then you have to have some type of patent, right? From a business perspective. A lot of things we think about with respect to intellectual property has to do with how do I actually legally own intellectual property. Simply because I said it, simply because I wrote it, simply because I posted it on Facebook, does that mean that I own that data? Maybe, maybe not. So let's look at this. Let's look at this definition. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, inventions, literary and artistic work and symbols, names, images, and designs used in commerce. Used in commerce, key word there. Four categories of IP, right? So you got patents. That's an invention. That's registered with the government. You invent something, right? And that has to be a new invention. You just can't take a regular mousetrap and paint it red and say, I've invented a new mousetrap. No. So, then we have trademarks. Like I say, trademarks, name, phases, sounds, or symbols used in association with services or products. We're all familiar with trademarks. Coca-Cola, it's got its own trademark. All your car companies, they have their trademark. With symbols or with sounds or with certain sounds. Yeah, a sound can actually be a trademark within itself. Copyrights. Now this is where I always love this area. These are laws that protect written or artistic expressions fixed in a tangible medium. Keyword there, tangible. A tangible medium. Okay. Not because I just hummed a tune in my head that now I can copyright that. It has to be a media type in a medium that is tangible. And trade secrets. Trade secrets is probably the fuzziest one of all. Okay, what is a trade secret? Formula, pattern, device, or compilation of data that grants the user an advantage over competition. Trade secrets, it's up to you. These other three, I can go to the copyright office and copyright these. Trade secrets, it's up to me to keep this safe. It's up to Coca-Cola to keep their recipe safe. It's up to Kentucky Fried or KFC. We don't use Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. KFC, to keep their 11 herbs and spices, safe. If that gets out, oh well, cat's out of the bag, and they will even have a hard time suing over that because it's up to them to maintain a trade secret. I say, now what is the value of IP? Oh man, it's really, and some people has this, and I'm kind of in between. I'm straddling the fence here. It says intellectual property is recognized as the most important asset of many of the world's largest and most powerful companies and entities. Because you let the secret sauce get out, you're done. That's your business. If you look at corporate espionage and everything that goes on in that environment, yes, trying to get our hands around someone else's intellectual property is bigger than just getting their product. If I got their product, you know what I'm going to try to do? Reverse engineer it. So why? I can reverse engineer their intellectual property that they made in that. Creative work has value, and when things of value are taken without permission, is it piracy or does it constitute fair use? Huge area, especially in the entertainment industry. Is it piracy? Is it fair use? Meaning that literature and music should be out there for the world to share. That's one side. Whereas the other side says, hey, look, I put a lot of effort and work into this, and, I need to have some compensation for this. So that's the battle that goes, and this goes on in companies all the time of understanding. Really, a lot of companies struggle here. Here's what I mean. I work for a company that for many, many years have produced fabulous military equipment, radars, okay? And for years, they have been a leader in radars on ships, aircraft, ground systems. But recently, had to kind of rethink what is really the value. What is it that we really produce? Is it a radar No, it's intellectual property. It's the software. It's the knowledge component that's in here. So protecting the radar is one thing. Protecting the knowledge within that. And I would tell you, a lot of companies miss that. They miss that quite often of what's really critical, because I can see a radar, I can see I can see the bent metal and the components, and I see it, and it's tangible, and I know that, yes, I can see something I can protect. The intellectual property from, really smart engineers and software developers, sometimes it's so intangible, it's hard to connect, to capture, sometimes it gets missed, it gets looked over. And that's why many times we have people walk out of organizations and leave, go other places, and they carry a lot of intellectual property with them that should have been harvested at their last place. Huge environment. Now, I would tell you, for me personally, yeah, this is a area that I always like talking about. Why? Because I produce a lot of content between our ministry websites, Bliss of the Word. We've got I don't know, over 300 videos in YouTube. Udemy.com, which is a educational resource. We've got courses out there. So I'm a big producer of media, of intellectual property. Now, here's the thing, and it's different formats. We've got CDs, we've got music, and we write songs, record, produce, all these type things. But then you start to ask your question, okay, what part of this is my intellectual property? What part of it actually does belong to society? If I create a Bible study from the King James Version of the Bible, can I claim that Bible study as my intellectual property? In my mind, no. I didn't create anything new. I just read a book, almost like doing a book report. Read a book, did a book report, came up with ways of bringing things together, and repackaged and represented that. Now, if I sit down to my keyboard and actually write a song that came from here, was inspired from my heart, and I write that. Now, yes, that's something I do. I claim as and I get those copyrighted as intellectual property because that is a original works that I did. But finding that balance, and I think that's really important when we think about, privacy and personal information. What is private, what's public, and what happens when I start aggregating public information to the point where now I can start gleaning privacy information about an individual. So many pieces that moves around this. So yeah, so the value of intellectual property is huge in many aspects. So that's why IP, intellectual property law, Title 17, it's the copyright law of the United States, and your Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, you hear that called many times. These are some of the laws that govern and protect intellectual property. Why? Because it's big money. It's an economic incentive to promote and creative works and be sure that those works are not exploited and used in the wrong way. There are trade-offs, though. Yeah, I say. Because many times because of that, it limits access, it limits exposure to, different music. I don't know if you remember the artist Prince, one of the great artists. You won't see a lot of his music on YouTube if you go out there for a reason, because he just the record companies, their deals they made at that time, did not put a lot of Prince's music out there in that space. So that's what brings that dilemma we talked about earlier. Privacy, fair use. As a matter of fact, segue, good talk, with Prince. Okay, a mother got sued by Universal Music Group, that was the record company that Prince was with at the time, for putting a video on YouTube of her 13-month-old baby dancing to the song "Let's Go Crazy." Now, I'm sure, to all of us, harmless, right? The music was in the background. She's playing her Prince song, and the little baby starts dancing. She picks up her phone, records that, and posts it out there on YouTube, and it starts to go viral. But from the artist's perspective, or from the record company perspective, you've taken intellectual property that Prince has made, and now you are able to do some different type commerce, because you get so many hits on YouTube, you start making money on that, and that's where that came in. And so lawsuit. I actually got this lady mother got sued because of that. Again, though, is it a fair use of media, or is it privacy of an icon's intellectual property? It's very, very tingy areas, right? So that's the dilemma we have today with social media, with peer-to-peer file sharing, home computers, all of these things in this space. So when we think about that, fair use, it determines whether a challenge activity qualifies as fair use. The courts employ a multi-factor balancing test, including consideration of things like the purpose and character of the use, whether it is commercial or non-commercial. So like I said, there's many things to be looked at in this environment. The nature of the work, is it factual, or was it just something purely creative? The amount and substantiality of the portion of the work. So did they use just one little clip out of this and move on? And I'll tell you where a lot of, rap is really big now, right? And a lot of your early rappers got sued because of what? Sampling. Because a lot of your songs, even still, were sampled from other music. And that really hits here. Did they just use one little drum beat? Or did they take the whole, like Vanilla Ice, right? Let's steal the whole song, the whole beat. Doom, 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 doom. Yeah, stop. Yeah, that one. So, and he got sued, and he kind of faded off into oblivion. But all that dealt with fair use and how to determine what fair use really is. And other things to look at, like I said, the effect of the potential market of that work. Meaning that if someone else takes that and it blows up, the person who got it, are they entitled to some of the resources that it generated? So when we think about DRM, like I say, digital rights management, there's been a lot of effort, technological effort of how do we manage digital rights. So, with the proliferation of all the technology we have, and this was really big, back probably 10, 15 years ago, peer-to-peer sharing, where people were sharing music peer-to-peer. So artists was not getting any compensation because, I download it and I would email it to you and you would listen to it and, over and over and over again. So it really proliferated this thing with respect to IP. And it also prompted a lot of different types of technologies to try to stop that. Sony, a lot of the makers of, equipment had technology to where, okay, you won't be able to, you could read it, but you won't be able to write it. And that pretty much, a lot of that failed miserably. So when we think about DRM copyright, here's an interesting question. Think about this for a second. Think about this. What prevents a person from going to Kinko's and making a copy of a hard copy book they bought? Nothing. I can buy a book written by someone else. Buy that book, and I could, if I wanted to, I could copy every page of that book. No. It's not the copyright laws that stops them. It's the cost, effort, and quality of the copy at the end of the day. That's why I'm not going to stand at Kinko's for 4 days copying the front and back of each page. Now, the same book in a digital format can be easily copied and distributed at low cost. Yeah, I could now download that book, and without unless they didn't have DRM, like Kindle and some of these others that locks things down to where a lot of times you can't copy a digital content. So it's the ease that technology has made this. It's not a change of morality or anything else. It's now technology has made it so much easier. And that's what technology has created with respect to intellectual property. We can move things in a digital format so much quicker. Like I said, so when we think about digital rights, not an implementation of a copyright law. It's not law. And again, this goes back to what we started with: ethics, morality, and the law. It's a combination of all three. What's ethically right, what's morally right, and what's legally right. Because no copyright law is going to keep us from doing those kinds of things. Now, when we think about peer-to-peer, a couple of artists and anybody that's older than probably 25 years old probably know these bands. Metallica. Oh yeah, I was like Metallica. I know somebody's playing an air guitar right now. And Dr. Dre, who is still very relevant, in the rap industry. But these guys, these two bands, these two artists, instrumental in filing a lawsuit against Napster. If you remember, Napster was a company back in the day, back in the early, late 1990s and early 2000s, that allowed peer-to-peer sharing of music, MP3s across the internet. Music share software that you could just swap MP3s with anybody. I could download it and I could distribute it to anybody I wanted to, royalty free. In 2000, they were sued. And that's what really, kind of kicked off this thing of understanding intellectual property, the power of intellectual property, digital rights management, and all the things associated with that. All right, guys, like I said, I know this was not kind of, it wasn't in your book, but it is, because I think it's very important, especially understanding those three things we talked about with respect to your personal information and in your organizations where you're going to work or where you're working now, the importance of IP, intellectual property, and how that fits into the organization. Now, privacy it's something that people are no longer taking for granted. I think it's a subject that's on the forefront of a lot of conversations. How do I keep my information private? And people want to have control over their personal information. Okay, and we all do, because you can only protect yourself so much in this environment. You have to give sometimes people your social security number when you go to a hospital, your doctor. There's information like that. HIPAA, there's laws in place that we try to protect that as much as possible, but it's hard to be 100% private. So because you have to share information and someone else has to have access. Now, we talk about the growth of electronic communication, data transfers. This has really made it very much more of a dynamic playing field, a dynamic digital environment that we live in. Now, when you talk about at an organizational level, how do we balance privacy, security, compliance with ease of use, convenience, and maintaining, the business and the mission associated with that? This is where, as cybersecurity professionals, this is where we live, right here. Understanding this. Now, the solutions, I will say, most of the time is not technical. And from a cybersecurity perspective, many times we're looking for technical solutions, firewalls and access control lists and, Active Directory groups and, all these techie things. But many times this starts with our administrative controls, okay? Having the right policies, the right procedures, the right gates in place, that we're, maintaining a vigilance within organizations, not based on high tech, but really more based on high touch and situational awareness. Okay, so with that said, we're going to wrap this up. And I want to thank you guys. Have a great week 2. If you have questions, reach out, and I will always, be reaching out to you. And again, maintain your cyber vigilance, your privacy, security, and compliance. Have a great week 2.